The story begins with Chuck Reynolds driving his rig through a desolate stretch of highway that winds through a remote valley. The sun is setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the landscape, and the air is thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. The valley is quiet, with only the sound of the engine and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees breaking the silence. Chuck is on a routine delivery, hauling a load of construction materials to a small town on the other side of the valley. He's driven this route a few times before, but this time something feels different. The radio, usually filled with the chatter of other truckers, is silent, and the CB channels are strangely devoid of the usual banter. The isolation of the valley feels more pronounced, as if the land itself is holding its breath. As he drives deeper into the valley, Chuck begins to notice odd things. Faint lights flickering in the distance, the smell of smoke on the wind, and shadows that seem to move in the corners of his vision. He tries to shrug it off, telling himself it's just his imagination playing tricks on him, but the unease lingers. Ahead, the road winds through a dense forest, the trees closing in on either side like tall, silent sentinels. The light fades quickly, and soon Chuck finds himself driving in near darkness, the only illumination coming from his headlights cutting through the thickening mist. The road ahead is barely visible, and Chuck's hands tighten on the steering wheel as he navigates the twisting turns. As the night deepens, the strange occurrences become more frequent and unsettling. Chuck sees ghostly apparitions at the edge of the road, figures dressed in old-fashioned clothing, their faces pale and their eyes hollow. They seem to be walking in a daze, as if reliving a moment from their past, unaware of the present. Chuck's heart races as he drives past them, the temperature inside the cab dropping suddenly, his breath visible in the cold air. He tries to focus on the road, but the apparitions become more persistent, appearing in greater numbers, their forms flickering in and out of existence like a fading memory. The radio crackles to life with snippets of music and voices from another era, old tunes and distant conversations that don't belong in the modern world. The voices are filled with emotion, a mixture of joy and sorrow, and Chuck can feel the weight of the past pressing down on him, as if the spirits are trying to communicate something to him. As he continues through the valley, Chuck begins to piece together the story of the apparitions. He passes by the remnants of an old, burned-out church, its charred wooden frame standing like a skeleton against the night sky. Nearby, he sees the outlines of what was once a small village, now abandoned and overgrown with weeds and vines. The spirits seem to be drawn to these places, their movement centered around the old church and the remains of the village. Chuck realizes that something terrible happened here, something that left a scar on the land and on the souls of those who once lived in the valley. He feels an inexplicable pull to stop and investigate, a sense that he needs to understand what happened and why the spirits are still here. Against his better judgment, Chuck pulls the truck to the side of the road, grabs his flashlight, and steps out into the cold night air. As Chuck explores the ruins of the village, the ghostly apparitions become more tangible, their forms solidifying as they reenact scenes from their past. He sees families gathered around a bonfire, children playing in the streets, and people going about their daily lives, oblivious to the tragedy that is about to befall them. The air is thick with a sense of impending doom, and Chuck can feel the tension building, as if the valley itself is holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable disaster to strike. He follows the apparitions to the old church, where a large gathering has formed, a community event filled with laughter and music. But the joy is short-lived. The atmosphere changes suddenly, the temperature dropping even further as a sense of fear and panic sweeps through the crowd. Chuck watches in horror as the vision unfolds. A fire breaks out, spreading quickly through the village, trapping the people inside their homes and the church. The apparitions scream and cry out, their faces contorted with terror as they try to escape the flames. The fire consumes everything in its path, leaving nothing but ashes and echoes of the past. Chuck is powerless to help, forced to witness the tragedy as it plays out in front of him, the spirits reliving their final moments over and over again. As the vision fades, Chuck is left standing in the ruins of the church, the cold wind whipping through the empty windows. The spirits are gone, their presence lingering like a memory etched into the fabric of the valley. But Chuck knows that the tragedy is far from over. The The spirits are trapped, unable to move on because of the unresolved pain and suffering that binds them to this place. Determined to help the spirits find peace, Chuck searches the ruins for anything that might explain the fire and why the spirits are still here. In the basement of the old church, he discovers a box of old letters and documents, carefully preserved despite the passage of time. The letters tell the story of the village and its people, a tight-knit community that was torn apart by greed and betrayal. Chuck learns that the fire was no accident, but an act of arson committed by someone seeking revenge for a perceived wrong. The villagers never had a chance to escape, and their souls have been trapped in the valley ever since, reliving the horror of that night. With a heavy heart, Chuck gathers the letters and takes them back to his truck. He knows that the spirits are watching him, waiting for him to do something to release them from their torment. He drives to the nearest town, where he finds a local historian who agrees to help him tell the story of the valley and the tragedy that occurred there. The story ends with Chuck returning to the valley one last time, the sun rising over the mountains as he places the letters in the ruins of the church. He lights a candle, saying a silent prayer for the souls that were lost, and as the first light of dawn touches the valley, he feels a sense of peace settle over the land. The apparitions are gone, their presence no longer felt, and Chuck knows that they have finally found rest. He climbs back into his truck and drives away, the weight of the valley's history lifting from his shoulders as he continues his journey down the open road.